Death at Rottingdean, Chapter 25. I warned the old fox and his neighbours long ago that they'd come to trouble with their side-sellings and buy-dealings, but we cannot have half Sussex hanged for a little gun-running. Rudyard Kipling, Puck of Pook's Hill. "Are we ready?" Charles asked, checking his trousers pocket for his compass, the map, and the small notebook. Patrick seemed confident enough, and Charles doubted that either compass or map would really be necessary, but it might be good to get a sense of where they were with reference to the above-ground features. "Ready, by heaven!" Kipling exclaimed, lifting the lantern to peer into the dark opening in the cellar wall. "Yo-ho-ho in the dead man's chest! How Stevenson would have loved this adventure!" As the boy had said, the wine rack was easily pushed aside, and the plank door readily opened to reveal a narrow, low-ceilinged passageway. Charles turned to Kate. "We'll leave the door open," he said, "and one of the lanterns here with you. When do you expect Mrs. Portney to return?" "I don't know," Kate said, her worried look giving her away. "Do you really think this is a good idea? What if you're discovered? What if you meet some of the villagers in the tunnels?" "We won't," Patrick said in a reassuring tone. "It's such a beastly place that nobody ever comes down here unless they're hauling or digging or something. And if they were doing that, we would hear them. Sound carries a long way in the tunnel. Sometimes you can hear people talking all the way in the other end." "Then I'll hear you," Kate said, "if you call out." "You will," Charles promised her. He suspected that they were in greater danger of discovery by Mrs. Portney than by anyone else, but he patted his jacket just the same, making sure that he had the pistol that the chief constable had lent him. He did not think that there would be trouble, or he would not have allowed the boy to lead them. On the other hand, it was well to be armed. By the time they had gone 50 yards or so in the direction of the beach, Charles had decided that the boy was right. The tunnel was a beastly place indeed, a place for gnomes and earth people. It was scarcely wider than Charles's shoulder and way too low for him to stand erect. The chalk walls were greyish-white and bore marks of picks and chisels like the tooth marks of some ancient beast, and here and there clusters of embedded flint nodules glinted in the lantern light. The ceiling was covered with soot where it had been blackened by the burning pitch of long-ago torches. At one point a date had been hacked roughly into the rock, with soot rubbed into it so that it stood out against the whiteness. 7040, Charles read, and whistled to himself, thinking back to a time a century and a half before, when desperate, angry men had cut this passageway foot by laborious foot through the solid chalk. He shivered, feeling ancient eyes on him, and thought that the rumours of the ghosts in the cellars of Rottingdean might not just be idle gossip. The air was damp and still and cold, like the air in an ice-house. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped, the sound magnified by the rock walls. "There's a section that crosses the drain along High Street," Patrick said, just above a whisper. Being shorter, he was walking more comfortably. "That's where the water is running, but mostly it's dry." "I must say," Kipling whispered hoarsely from the rear, "there's not much here in the way of elbow room. How do they move the goods in such a tight space?" "In pushcarts and on sleds," Patrick said. "They've built wood ones that just fit. You'll see them in the big cellar." They walked in silence for a moment, then he added, "There's sort of a junction up just ahead. We go to the left. It's not far after that." Walking behind Patrick, Charles felt himself fascinated by the boy who seemed to know everything and moved so effortlessly and without fear of this dark place. There was more to this bright, inquisitive lad than there was to the average village boy, that was certain. It was a damned shame that Patrick's father was so far away and took very little interest in his boy. The boy deserved better. What's more, he was at a vulnerable age in a vulnerable position. Without further formal schooling and under the influence of these enterprising village fellows with their get-rich schemes, it was likely that he would follow in their footsteps. Better to get him out of the village, into something more settled and with a greater promise. He would talk to Kipling. Perhaps between them they could come up with something suitable. Patrick held up his hand, halting their forward progress. "Here's the junction," he said. "The big cellar is to the left. If we keep straight on, we'll come to the beach." Charles peered ahead. The tunnel was wider and more obviously travelled, and there were deep scratches in the chalk walls and gouges in the floor, as if something heavy had been shoved along. He looked down at the crude map. "There seem to be several branches. Are they still open?" "Only one," Patrick said. "The branch that goes to the cellar of White Horse. It's used quite often, as it is the only entrance at that end, except for the opening onto the beach." Charles took the lantern from Kipling and held it up, looking to the right. That tunnel was narrower and much lower. He would have to bend double to enter it. Where does that lead? To the cellar of the Black Horse, Patrick said. Mostly what goes that way are small wooden barrels of spirits. They rope them together and drag them. He grinned knowingly. Perry organizes that part. He owns the Black Horse. No doubt Perry organized that part very expeditiously, Charles thought, moving the liquor straight from the ship to the cellar of the alehouse where it was let down. As he understood it, spirits were usually smuggled over proof and were diluted to bring them to a strength that was both drinkable and profitable. Perhaps some letting down had occurred in the cellar of Seabrook House and might account for the spilled brandy. And who organizes the rest of it? Charles asked. Captain Smith always managed the ship signaling and all that. Who oversees the transfer of goods? The boy looked cornered. Mr. Todwell, he muttered at last. And the distribution? That is, moving their goods to their final destination? The boy did not answer. Charles nodded. Well then, shall we carry on? They turned to the left. 50 paces later, the tunnel widened suddenly into a square, cave-like room, carved out of the chalk. The lantern flickered eerily against the white walls, casting grotesquely misshapen shadows, and the flint nodules winked in like wise eyes from the darkness. Boxes, crates, and small barrels were stacked against the walls, the lids stamped with their contents, although there were no attached bill of lading. Charles stooped to read. Tobacco, fabric, lace, tea. It was no wonder Kate had been able to purchase in Rottingdean the same goods she might have bought at an exclusive shop in London. All this merchandise stored here against the day when it would be hauled out and distributed for sale. He glanced around. Still, though, it was a very large room, not even partially filled, and obviously constructed at great effort. "This is newly excavated?" he asked Patrick. "Most of it. There was a smaller cellar here to start with, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet or so. The rest was dug last summer." "How many people were involved?" Kipling asked. "It looks like it would take an army to dig it out, and most of the men in the village were in it one way or another, either digging or hauling the rock to the beach." "Last summer," Charles said thoughtfully. "Is that when the smuggling began in earnest?" The boy nodded. Trunky Thomas did some before then, but he was the only one. His father was a smuggler before him, you see. Kipling was looking around. "What strikes me as strange," he said in an amazed tone, "is the sheer size of this room. Imagine the rock that had to be moved, and think of the hauling work involved." "And yet," Charles said, "it is not much used." He turned to Patrick. "Has it ever been filled to its capacity?" The boy shook his head. Charles spent the next few moments looking at the crates of stores and finding very little of real interest. At the back of the room, however, he came on something vastly more intriguing. A dozen empty crates were stacked precariously high, and behind them were a shadowy opening in the wall. "Give a hand here, Kipling," he said. "Let's move these." A few moments later they had uncovered a shallow alcove, empty except for 3 small wooden crates. They had been hidden, Charles thought. Why? "I would like to pry these open," he looked around. "I wonder whether—" "I'll get a crowbar," Patrick offered quickly. "They keep one with the carts." In a moment he was back, a short iron bar in hand. Charles lifted the smallest box from the alcove and put it on the floor next to the lantern and looked at it. On the cover were printed several words in large black letter type. "What does it say?" Patrick asked. "In German it says blasting caps. Handled with care. Do not drop." Charles translated. "German." "Maybe we shouldn't open it," Kipling said nervously. "They might blow up in our faces." "Detonators can deteriorate with age," Charles agreed, "and there's no telling how old these are. We'll leave them." "What are these people intending, do you think?" Kipling asked in a puzzled voice. "To undermine the entire South Downs?" "I'd be surprised if they aim to do any blasting in the vicinity of the village," Charles said. "It would certainly give away the game, and it might cause some structural damage up above. They'd hate to bring down their landlord's walls." He looked at Patrick. "Do you recall any blasting?" The boy shook his head. It was all picks and shovels and men sweating and cursing. Kipling chuckled. "Well said, my boy. Sweating and cursing comes with picks and shovels, as certainly as blood comes with bullets." "But I suppose," Charles said reflectively, "that someone might have thought they would have need of blasting. Let's see what else we have here. Maybe that will resolve the mystery." But the second box, when opened, did nothing to enlighten them. Instead, it gave Charles something new to puzzle over. "Telegraph keys," he muttered, feeling baffled. "Coil buzzers. Like the telegraph key in the post office." Patrick said, "for sending messages out of town." Then he frowned. "But where, I wonder? If it's just Brighton, Mr. Tudwell dispatches me or one of the other boys." Charles wondered too. As he understood the smuggling operation, at least as he thought he understood it, it was small-scale, self-contained local enterprise relying on local people to unload the ship and distribute the merchandise. But these telegraph keys suggested something much larger, some sort of coordinated activity that required communications with distant points, and quick, clandestine communications at that, achieved by climbing a pole, tapping a telegraph wire. Their investigations were beginning to assume a larger dimension, but what did it all mean? "Well," Kipling said cheerfully, "at least we know that in the event of a national emergency, Rottingdean will be able to communicate with the outside world." There was one last box left in the alcove, a stout wooden crate some 2 feet long with rope handles on each end, and the designation M/96 ein Dutzend stamped on the lid, and under that word Oberndorf. Kipling bent over to pick up the crate. "Beastly heavy for its size," he grunted and set it down on the floor beside the other boxes. He straightened. "I say, Sheridan, can this box be what I think it is?" "I believe so," Charles said, and squatted, considering the box for a long moment. Yes, it almost certainly was, but why? The blasting caps, the telegraph keys, and now... He frowned. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but he did not like the look of it. Not at all. Patrick picked up the crowbar. "Well, if nobody else is going to open it." "Don't be cheeky, my young sinner," Kipling said, and took the crowbar. "I'll do the honors." He pried the lid and laid it aside. A strong smell of metal lubricant arose from the box. "Well, I'll be blowed," Kipling said, dropping the crowbar with a clang and staring. "It jolly well is." "Yes, indeed, it most certainly is." Charles took a heavy oil-paper package from the crate and began to unwrap it. "I still don't," Patrick began perplexedly, and then with great interest. "It's a gun." "A dozen guns, actually." Charles held up the pistol and admiring the ingenuity of its design. The long, slender barrel coated with jelly gleamed in the light of the lantern. The checkered wooden grip fit the palm of his hand. He hefted it, considering. Just a shade under 4 pounds, heavy by some preferences, but considering its firepower. "Well, well," Kipling whistled between his teeth. "Nothing like my trusted old target pistol. Wicked-looking thing, I dare say." He bent closer. "What the devil do you make of that rectangular body, Sheridan? I've never seen anything like that before." "That," Charles said, "is the magazine where the ammunition is stored. This is a self-loading pistol, Kipling." "A self-loading?" Another whistle. Charles nodded. "According to the gun shop owner I talked with, this gun can fire off the whole magazine as fast and as easily as you can pull the trigger. The recoil of firing opens the breech and ejects the empty cartridge case as it loads a fresh cartridge." He looked down at the pistol with an odd mixture of admiration and sadness, realizing that its capacity for automatic reloading enormously amplified the handgun's killing power and transformed it from a defensive to an offensive weapon. After this, close combat would never be the same. "Very ingenious," he said, half to himself, "and very, very deadly." "It ejects a cartridge?" Patrick looked at Charles, a frown between his eyes. "Then it's the same sort of gun that killed Captain Smith." "Indeed, Patrick," Charles said. "Yes, it's almost certainly the same sort of gun." He squinted at the pistol. "By Jove, this rear sight appears to be adjustable. Take a look at this, Kipling." Kipling studied the sight. "The graduations are marked off in hundreds," he said. "Up to 700 feet, you suppose? Yards?" Charles took the gun back. "Sights on military weapons are marked in yards or meters," he said, "but 700, that's the normal range of a rifle. Almost unbelievable for a pistol. There's some sort of chamber marking here. Let's see if we can take it out." He took out his magnifying lens and held the gun closer to the light to peer at it. "What does it say?" Kipling asked. "Is it a British weapon or French?" He hunched his shoulders. "You don't suppose these men are running guns and explosives to the Irish, do you? By damn if they are." Charles looked up. "I don't know about that, but this gun is neither British nor French. The chamber was stamped with System Mauser. It's German." But the box, which advertised itself as containing a dozen such guns, contained only 11. They did not require assistance of the great detective, Charles thought, to conclude that the 12th Mauser was the one that had killed Captain Smith.